Situation 3 of Panzerblitz has been referred to as the pure scenario. But why is that? Today we will talk strategy and how both sides can pull off a victory here today on Legendary Tactics. And now a word from this video's sponsor. Panzerblitz Situation 3 is a classic breakthrough mission for the Germans. They have the simple but unenviable task of clearing a corridor 3 hexes wide from the northern edge to the southern edge, free from either Russian units or their field of fire. The Russians must simply prevent them from doing so by maintaining a continuous line east to west. The Russians, on the other hand, have to set their line, not knowing exactly where the Germans will strike. This will be made more difficult by the fact that they do not have much in the way of mobility, so a backup plan will be hard to pull off. A proper setup is crucial here, as leaving a weak spot in their defenses will likely mean defeat. The Germans, unfortunately, don't have a lot in the way of resources. They will be battling a lot of infantry in the woods, using units that are not effective in doing so. The Germans have to pick the right point to attack and use their forces as well as possible to pull off the win. No question, it's going to be a difficult task for both sides. Let's take a look at the layout of the boards first. From left to right, we will start with board 3. This board is quite open, which offers advantages and disadvantages for both sides. On the one hand, the Germans can maneuver a fair bit across the clear, flat ground, but the Russian mortars and artillery have a great field of fire here. Only a handful are needed, as they can mutually support each other. There is the obstacle of the gully in the south, but this can be bypassed by the Germans at the cost of some time. Also of interest is Hill 107, which can potentially block the field of fire of any artillery attempting to cover that ground from the hills to the right. So board 3 offers the German the most room for maneuver, but it offers the Russian a lot of opportunity to use ranged fire effectively. Board 2 is arguably the most important part of the battlefield. Hill 132 dominates this board, especially as it can extend firepower across the wide open area of board 3. It is reasonably defensible and contains a potentially important road junction in Bednost. The Russian needs to make sure to defend it and the approaches to it. The road that runs north-south will be the primary path of advance, which can be guarded by Hill 129, along with the western and eastern approaches to Hill 132. Board 1 is a challenging board for the Germans to consider. There are lots of woods, streams, and hills, making ranged fire very difficult, if not completely impractical. There is only one road that runs north-south, and it crosses a gully at the south end that will be very difficult to bypass due to the marshes around it. Hill 135, which is right next to this road, is very defendable. So board 1 makes it hard for the Russian to use any ranged fire, but is also the toughest for the German player to traverse. The southern ends of all 3 boards are all swamp and woods, and are a tough go for the Germans, which both sides will have to take into account. As a proper Russian setup is really the key to victory, it isn't a bad idea for the Russians to take full advantage of this by setting up very far forward, positioning their infantry in the woods with anti-tank guns nearby. A few mortars and howitzers can be used towards the north end of the board, where they will have a greater field of fire to add some depth to their defense, and can also help fulfill the victory conditions by linking their firepower across the whole board as a chain. All one would really need for that purpose are 2 76.2mm field guns and 2 82s. The Russian infantry in the woods are more or less invincible, although most of them will be useless as they won't ever be within range of any of the German units. But as you don't know where the attack is going to fall, you need to stretch them out right across the boards, within a couple of hexes of each other, to set up an eventual victory with the help of some anti-tank guns. The infantry are especially effective when used to block roads and choke points, which generally force the German to look at other options. Use the range of the anti-tank guns to shore up any gaps in the line, but also to cover the infantry and look for opportunities to suppress or even destroy German armored units. Here's an example of what that setup could look like. Please note the reserve that is in place and where. The road that runs right across the boards from west to east offers the defending Russian player, who does not have much in the way of mobility, the opportunity and flexibility to reinforce against the German attack. This is where the Russian trucks and even the wagons will be most useful. Keep a couple of trucks here with a rifle company and an anti-tank gun on feature 132, and you can deploy them pretty quickly when and where needed. So other than the ranged weapons in the north with linking fields of fire and the mobile reserve along the east-west road, keep the main Russian line in the south. Build in some depth to your defense where you can, thereby requiring the German player to destroy 2 or 3 units in order to win, which can be a tall order. So what can the Germans do? Well, if you look at their forces, they don't have a lot to throw at the Russian infantry in the woods. Even if every unit available fired at a Russian infantry company, it could only make 2-to-1 odds, which is not likely to destroy it. The key is to attack the ranged weaponry. Look for weak points in the Russian defense, especially where there is a point in the line which is only maintained by 1 or 2 units. Once you've identified the weak point, you're going to have to hit it with everything you have. And it's likely you will be focused on either board 2 or 3, as board 1 doesn't offer many avenues for advance, and it doesn't take much for your force to get bogged down there. Once you have opened a corridor in the defense, you will now need to defend against the slow-moving but potentially strong Russian counterattack. A tactic that might work for the Germans is a feint. It's entirely possible that there may not be time for it, but it could potentially send the Russian reserves in the wrong direction, giving you an opportunity to cut access to the east-west road with a well-placed anti-tank gun that can blast any truck or wagon making its way back towards you. Once that road is cut, there won't be many opportunities for the Russian to reinforce their position, creating a potential victory for the German side. However, overall, this is the Russian player's game to lose, but a German victory is still possible and, if pulled off, would certainly be worthy of bragging rights. I hope this breakdown of Situation 3 of Panzerblitz was of value to you, and if it was, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe down below. For additional content, please consider becoming a member and supporting our channel. Now stay tuned for our initial post-game thoughts after our playthrough. We have just finished Situation 3, and what were your thoughts on this situation here?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I felt it was like a real reverse role situation from Situation 1.
Yes.
Where it felt to me in Situation 1 you set up your shop, basically your starting position, and then you just kind of stayed pat most of the game. And that's really how I felt for a majority of this game.
Yeah.
From the Russian perspective, it just, once I had my initial setup, it was okay. Wait for a hole to become, plugged up or something, or taken out, and then react.
Yes. Yeah. And that's I think the basic role of the Russian player in this game. Now you set up a nice string. You had a nice string of long-range weapons to kind of meet the victory condition in the back, but you also set up a pretty tough defensive position across the front as well.
I went for the dual attack, dual approach there.
And then you had reinforcements kind of going on in the center as well.
Yeah, and those ones I kind of used as my thought was to use them to fill in a hole if I needed to, fill a gap.
Yeah. Yeah. And from my perspective, my first instinct was to send in some units to disrupt, at least take out the guy on
107
peak 107 there.
Yeah.
And then that would disrupt, it would make the stretch, along that stretch there would be unusable, or for your purposes. And then I was going to look to set up like a 3 hex kind of going through this way basically.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I was looking at zooming in on your defenses here. I think that you'd set it up really well. Now we did have some guidance from doing some reading online and stuff as to what would be a good defense, but because your initial instinct was to actually set up along the back and just have essentially concede a large part of the map, and just fall back to a really defensive line all in the back.
Yeah, which maybe would, I think in second thought that probably was a little bit too passive.
Yeah, it could have been. But who knows? But yeah, it was certainly having the infantry in the forest as you head, and you did a similar setup in the first game. Now in the first game, what I did, I totally overcommitted my forces to the northern artillery. I sent in basically the whole force, and it was totally unnecessary. I just needed to send a strong enough force to make sure the job was done.
Yeah, and then I found you kind of ran out of time then, because you had them way out of position.
Yeah, well, what I was hoping for, and it would have in our first game of this, was I was coming and I was trying to actually make it work along this stretch, basically.
Oh, okay.
Because I all I needed was to take out this guy, and it was
Done.
Doable at least.
Yeah.
And so I was hanging around in this kind of neighborhood with the idea of swooping in on turn 9 or 10 when you wouldn't have a lot of time to react. That was my kind of overall plan.
Right.
And I think there's this is in many ways the best part of the line to do that, because anywhere else you could be reinforced by like both sides. So if you go up this way, you got two groups that can come in and reinforce. But here you're kind of using the edge of the board it's a bit of a gamey kind of thing to do, but you've got the edge of the board on one side, so there's no threat that way. So you only have to worry about the threat from one direction.
Okay,
and
right.
I thought that might be a good thing, but it's really tough because this group of units here are pretty tough to dislodge.
They're pretty hunkered down. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
so when
the defensive levels are so strong on them.
Yes, they are. Yeah. And so because the tanks lose so much of their effectiveness against those units, there really isn't a lot of strength. So I figured this unit was actually my best shot, because if I had been fortunate enough to remove that unit, it would have been very tough. You wouldn't have been able to shore up the
line,
the line fast enough,
right?
Even with your reinforcements there. So I just was kind of looking. I thought, okay, but the main problem was I just couldn't. I should have committed basically all of my forces to breaking through right here. I think that's what you got to do as the Germans. You just
like pick a
focus,
point, right?
Pick a point and throw everything you have at it, and hopefully you can get some combination, a 1-2 punch of a disrupt, and then followed up by a double, like a dispersed, but with a special dispersed right afterwards through close assault tactics. So you have your infantry there to follow up on the first attack. And that's what I neglected to do. I think that's what your idea of putting the artillery across the back to create a secondary line
obstacle for you to worry about.
It's something else I need to worry about, and it's not hard necessarily to take out if I have the time, but
it's just the time.
It's the time, and so I think that was where I kind of I identified the weak point correctly, but I think it was too late. I was too busy
you didn't
running
have enough
back
forces to put to it.
Yeah, I needed everything I had, and I didn't have it available. It took too long for me to get forces into position that way.
Okay,
but
so my general vibe on this scenario is that it's Russia's to lose.
Yes, I think so.
Do you feel like the Germans have like a legitimate shot, or do you feel like the Germans winning is more like fluke luck?
Well, again,
I
think
the way you were talking, it feels to me like you don't think the Germans have a real shot at this one.
Well, they do, but again, I think it just comes from hitting that one weak point wherever that happens to be. And I think in your setup here, I think this here is the weak point, because after that collapses, and especially if this formation is unfortunate enough to be gone, I don't think you can shore that up fast enough, because all your units are so slow, and
it'll take forever to get over there.
Well, yeah, and even if they did, they'd have to expose themselves to overruns, and so I think it would be
a disaster.
It would be a disaster. So in my opinion, that is the weak point. However, it would have been interesting if we had just spontaneously set up if you'd just done a setup without kind of knowing, without
some
having done the
spots,
reading,
right? Yeah.
yeah, and just kind of said, okay, I think this will be a good position. Because I think if that's the case, I think that there's a lot of mistakes that could be made that could be exploited by the Germans. But this is obviously a setup that has been played many times by the people that we learned from, and so that made it a very tough nut to crack. But I don't think it's a hopeless situation. But I think
it's tough.
This scenario has been around since over 50 years. So
yeah,
it's been played, and they know people have figured out what works.
Speaking of the setup, I think that was one of the most daunting tasks of this particular situation because they give you all your pieces and they say, okay, anywhere you want,
anywhere on the board.
It's just overwhelming. Like I was actually overwhelmed by it, and I really did appreciate having some of the guidance there. To sort of just give tidbits of information. Here's some ideas, right? Because it's just a lot to get your head around. How am I going to actually parse this out? Because it's not a small map, but
no. I mean, it's the full board.
It's full 3 boards.
But
right?
I think attacking on board 1, it's just so tricky. Like I can't really envision going through the swamp. There's just too much. It's just too open, and you've got some anti-tank guns here.
Yeah, and actually in both our games, you never came near.
No, it's just too dangerous. I mean, just to be. Because remember, if these tanks, I mean, you'd be able to put 24 attack factors against my tanks, and that can cause a bunch of wrecks, which means it's tough to traverse this road, and essentially becomes impassable. It doesn't take too long for that to happen, and your other alternative is kind of plowing through this forest, which you can't, as you've only got, as a vehicle, you can't really get through them very well at all. So
right.
So board 2 here is a little bit more
friendly, but not much.
Friendly, but not a lot more. Yeah. You've definitely got some channels of attack. But I figured that board 3 is really the only option. It was the only one that gave me the opportunity to maneuver as I felt I needed to. So
and what we read in some of the information on Situation 3 was that west-east road is very critical.
Yes, for the Russians.
Yeah. So
and I could see that. Like if you're looking to reinforce, you're looking to get units back and forth or whatever. The road this is definitely a key. Yeah. Part of just to get you laterally across
to where you need to
defend.
Be, right? Yeah. So
yeah, and you've got some interesting defensive spots, like say right here on Hill 135. We got cover, but it has a view of the road and the surrounding terrain. You've got, of course, there's always options on Peak 132, somewhere like here, for example, where you can kind of oversee a lot of stuff going past. So but it's definitely, I think for the Russians, this is won or lost in the setup.
Oh yeah, because I found after that it was pretty much you just stand pat. Like I think I passed 3 or 4 turns like in a row, just past my turn because
but you were
there's nothing I had to do.
No, there's nothing you needed to accomplish, and really anytime the infantry move out of the woods is always going to be risky, right? As soon as you move out here, then there's the potential for an overrun, and it's not even that you get eliminated right away. Maybe you get dispersed, but you but then you're stuck, and then you keep getting run over essentially until the unit's eliminated.
Exactly.
And so there's really no need to leave your position.
No, it didn't make any sense. So
I did try working away a little bit on this position here, again with my view that I was really looking to establish my line here. So my thinking was disrupt the artillery up at the top, break that chain, and then see if I can get a kill down here, and then at least makes it a little bit tougher. Although this unit here with a view of 5 takes almost to the edge of the board. So it's not enough to complete the line of sight that you need to win, but it's something you could move out here on the last turn of your move, because you move last, right?
That's
so
right.
you could move, say, here,
and then it's done. Yep.
And then and you could complete the
5.
So I knew that was potentially an issue as well. So really, I think I identified correctly that this is the weakest point in your line. There may be a point, say, here or something like that, maybe one of these, but the terrain just isn't favorable. So
just too
this was
tough
the only spot where I could really hammer you. But having those weak tanks,
so frustrating. I could hear in your voice, you're like, they're halved. They're halved.
Because you have a nice stack of 3 tanks at 14 attack factors, and sorry, these are only 21s.
Yeah, exactly.
21 attack factors instead of 42. That would have made quite a difference.
I would have been blown to smithereens.
Yeah. So but overall, I think that it's a good scenario. I think there's a lot of potential possibilities for finding some neat setups for the Russians and some neat points of attack for the Germans. But I think, again, the Germans just need to focus everything on the weakest point from the beginning and hammer away until you have some sort of a breakthrough, and then worry about the rest of the board and trying to stave off the Russians from there.
Yeah, and for me, I really thought it was an interesting scenario. I question if maybe Situation 3 was a little early to be putting this much onus on the Russian to say, just put your pieces wherever you want on the entire board. I just thought that was it was a bit of a tall order, I think, for early. If you were starting at 1 and playing through, I feel like that's a bit of a tall order for 3 in. But
absolutely, where Situation 1 had a kind of similar idea, but there were some pretty obvious. You wanted to be around the fortifications. You wanted to be in and around. Where
and I think did they not give
most.
you a little more parameters too? Like you didn't have the entire.
Yeah, well, that's right. I think it was just on the one.
I think you had one board, right? So you had to. So at least they narrowed it a little bit because
they did.
Just to keep these a little more manageable. But
that's great. But for those of you who tuned in and watched our playthrough and our little strategy guide here, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And join us next time for Situation 4.
This has been Legendary Tactics.